I want to give you a copy and paste formula for one of the largest military superpowers of all time that you can use to scale your business as far as you could possibly want to take it. So, to get started, we have one section, which is where most small business owners are at. And this is basically the beginning of any company, really. You might have a few colleagues you work with, or you might have a few friends, or might be a family run business. But either way, a section, as far as the military is considered, is basically like one group of people. And the reason this is so important to start with is that this is a self managing, self organizing level of group where you don't need a supervisor, a manager, a team leader for this level of group. You might have one once you get slightly above this level, and we'll get onto that in just a second. But the reason you start with a section is because you start with a group of people that might have some natural leaders within the group that might help out a bit if there's a row or whatever situation occurs. But naturally, you don't require someone as their main job to focus on this group, to manage them and lead them. And that's why section is really important in terms of its copy and paste nature for whenever you're building any organization of any shape or size. You start with a section, you start with one group, and it might also be for research purposes or actually trying to scale purposes. But whatever reason you are trying to expand for any reason, you take that group of people up to like 8 to 10 or 12 people, and that is a self managing, self organizing group of people. Then, once you get above 7 to 12 people, this is where you start bringing on technically multiple departments. But as far as the military is concerned, it's platoons in this case. So, this is like in the military, you'd have snipers, you'd have paratroopers, main troopers, assault team, whatever it might be. I'm not well versed on the military and their ins and outs of it all and how it exactly works other than this organizational structure. But this is where you get to department level. So, of course, if you think about a regular company, you might have a team of 8 or 9 people and they'll have a supervisor or a team leader. And that makes up like one group within a big department that might be the sales team. So you might have like you might have the floor manager team, you have the actual like customer assistants, and then the floor managers manage the customer assistants. And so each one of those groups make up a group which is one platoon. And that is ultimately where I would say most small business owners cap out at, because at this point, this is where you have anywhere from 15 to 50 people, as it says here, 14 to 48. And this is really, again, if you have a larger company, you'll have multiple sections, which is like your supervisors, your team leaders, your assistants, your sales reps, your accountants, whatever it might be, whatever main task role you have, you'll have multiple groups of them within one platoon, because a platoon technically counts as like one department of people. And so that is ultimately where most small business owners get to, and they never really scale beyond that. So this is exactly how you scale beyond this, and it'll be taken into account here how sections work too, because the next level is the companies. Now, this is where, again, small business owners get to the kind of SME level. This is where you might go from a couple of million a year to maybe 7 or 8 figures per year. Maybe you get to 7 figures per year in profit finally with the business at this level, because this is where, or even 8 figures in profit, really, especially if you have over like 50 employees, because this is where you will finally start to have technically multiple companies within a larger organization. And you can see this with small businesses that are maybe 7 or 8 figures in annual revenue. And ultimately, they do multiple things as a business. It's just they don't have multiple external businesses doing it. You have one big business, and you might have like a product business, a service business within inside the whole organization. And this is where a company comes into it, because you might have like, let's say, 2 platoons as far as the military is concerned. But those 2 platoons are, if it's like a big marketing agency with a couple hundred employees in this case, you might have your services division and you have your consulting division, or your, I don't know, branding division, or whatever it might be. So it might not necessarily be 2 separate companies, 2 separate legal entities, but it might just be 2 separate entities inside of one large organization. And now the next level is really where you get to like the larger kind of Amazon size level of business, which is where you go beyond having like just a few sections, let's be honest. So at this point, we all know Amazon for having Amazon Web Service, Amazon Prime, having fulfillment by Amazon, all these different things within Amazon as a company, that they're large enough to be hundreds of little small companies. And that is literally what Amazon is made of. And this is where the battalion comes in, because of course, really, a battalion is actually still a fairly small business as far as Amazon is concerned. But Amazon is just made up of hundreds, dozens probably. In this case, they've got maybe 50, 100,000 employees around the world, or a couple 100,000 maybe. They have dozens and dozens of battalions. And most small businesses might have just a couple of companies, but as far as Amazon's concerned, in their case, they have like dozens of battalions, because battalions are ultimately like that. A battalion is Amazon Web Service, Amazon Prime, because Amazon Prime as an actual business itself inside of Amazon will be hundreds of small sections, dozens of small platoons working to make it all work. And that is why Amazon will have multiple platoons in this case, and why a small business might just be one big platoon full of loads of small companies, like again, a service division, a sales division, a branding division, a consulting division, whatever it might be. And these might actually be external companies, but either way, the whole purpose of this is that this is an exact copy and paste formula, because regardless of how you want to use this structure, it's copy and paste. So you know that you can't necessarily have a battalion without a company, because otherwise you're going to have massive problems with naturally 5 people can't manage 500 people. You need teams and groups to manage those 500 people. You're not going to have a platoon right underneath a battalion, right above a platoon, for instance. So this is why you need this as like a copy and paste structure for knowing how to structure and scale things accordingly for the most efficient scaling and organizational efficiency possible. So that goes as far as it needs to cover for basically working out how to scale it. But the next thing I wanted to mention and kind of go on to is what's really important with scaling internally is that you actually have organizational problems in some cases when you try to bring on more people, because the great thing about all that might be that you now have 100 people working with you. You had 50 or 60 before, but you need to grow as your revenue grows and as your margins grow too. So let's start with the average small business. Let's say obviously you've got businesses making 50, 60K a year, you've got businesses making 5, 10 million a year. But let's say the average small business makes around 250K a year, and they have around 6 employees on average. It might be a small family run business, it might be a local business with multiple families running it. But either way, if they're making around 250K a year and the average revenue per employee is around 41,600 per year, then that is where they're starting at. And let's say they scaled to doubling their revenue. They get to around 500K per year. They go to 500,000 a year. Now their revenue per year is 83,200, which is great. They've doubled the revenue per employee on average. Obviously, there might be a sales team that's making the most of that revenue, whatever the situation might be for that business. But either way, if they haven't had to scale internally, that's been a great situation for them. And now this is where there's a caveat to this, because if you were to scale poorly, you might scale too quickly internally before your revenue and your profits can keep up with you. Because if you scale beyond your current financial capacity, you get to a point where you're actually losing money. In this case, it's like nearly 8,500 per year per employee, because you've scaled faster than your employee scaling abilities can keep up with you. However, if you are to manage it effectively, and by effectively, I would just simply say that as you're scaling, you take into account factors which I'll get onto in just a minute, you'll be able to scale so that you actually make money and not lose money. So in this case, let's say you go to 10 employees from 6, but you've gained an extra 250K per year. You're now gaining an extra 8.5K per employee in this case. So how do you do this? How do you actually not scale so you lose money, but scale so you make money? And this is really where the planning and strategy for scaling internally comes in, because this is where most small business owners end up having financial situations that are bad and problems. And obviously larger businesses can handle this because they've got the margins and they've got an extra spare 20, 50, 100K to deal with this, and they can finance stock, whatever the situation might be. But for a small business owner, if you obviously don't have much money to begin with and you're trying to scale, naturally it might be hard to work out, how do I find an extra few employees when I even can't afford them in the first place? And this is exactly where outsourcing comes in. And I might sound biased here, I'm an agency owner myself, I do marketing services, but naturally, even though I'm biased, it's just a fact that if you are starting with 5 or 10 employees or 15 employees or 20 employees at most, and you're currently making 100, 200, 300K per year with your business, you naturally can't afford to just bring on more work because you don't have those spare employees or contractors to be able to do this. And this is where outsourcing comes in. And it's what I tell well, at this point, thousands of business owners I've spoken to on cold calls and appointments by saying that, okay, well, if we are scaling this, if you are getting an extra 3 to 5 projects per month, then I'd highly recommend bringing in contractors in this case so you actually can afford to do it. But also, the most important thing about this is bringing in work here is what you shouldn't focus on doing internally until you can properly afford it and you have the margins to do so. And that's ultimately why agencies and outsourcing solutions are the most affordable option for most businesses. So that's ultimately why I might sound biased here, but I'd ultimately say that if you are a small business owner, I would highly, highly, highly recommend looking at external agencies and freelancers and external solutions to the problem before you hire internally. Because yes, there might not be a member of staff, but ultimately there's a lot of perks of not having a member of staff and having them as just an external contractor or external, like just one expense anyway, rather than employee, employee costs and employee taxes and things like that. So ultimately, that's why it's important to be careful how quickly you scale. Although I've talked about scaling and how to scale effectively in this video, I really want to hit the nail on the head with this and say that if you are scaling, if you're trying to scale, be sure to focus on outsourcing first. Really, it's the most effective solution, especially if you're even just hiring a couple of people to begin with. You might spend a few thousand per month on employing people to begin with, but it might only cost you 25 to 30% of that. I mean, for instance, I'm working with clients that, for instance, if we weren't working with them, they'd be probably spending close to 5 or 6K per month just on the salaries. Whereas with us, it's, not even like it's £1,000 a month service fee plus ad spend. So for them, they're saving like 4 to 5K per month just on salaries. And that's also including our ad spend as well. So they are making money and also saving on top of that, like 4 to 5K per month. And that's just a small business with just a few thousand spare. So really take into account how much that affects you when you're growing. Obviously, a spare few K once you have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands left over doesn't make too much of a difference, although they add up. But just take into account when you are trying to scale. So nonetheless, I hope that little ramble at the end helps. But if you do want more help with trying to grow your business, then I have linked a video below to helping you get more customers or clients for your business. But yeah, nonetheless, thanks very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to leave a like, subscribe for more videos like this, hit the notification bell to see whenever I upload a new video. And thanks very much for watching. See you in the next video.